The waiting room is quiet. It's the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is waiting for something to happen. A woman sits, her eyes darting from the clock to the door, checking if her name will be called. She fidgets with her hands, twisting a ring on her finger, a nervous habit she's had for years. Today it feels worse than usual. Her name echoes through the empty room. Ms. Johnson? It's sharp, almost too loud in the silence. She stands, taking a deep breath, and walks toward the reception desk. The receptionist looks up from her computer, offering a polite smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. "Doctor's office down the hall, second door on the left," she says. The woman nods and heads toward the corridor. Her steps echo on the tile floor, each one feeling heavier than the last. Her hands are still shaking, but she keeps them hidden in the pockets of her jacket. She pauses at the door. It's plain, white with a simple label, Dr. Matthews. Her heartbeat picks up, but she takes a deep breath and knocks softly. "Come in," a voice calls from inside. She opens the door and steps into the office. The air smells sterile, like antiseptic, and something faintly metallic. Dr. Matthews is sitting at his desk. He doesn't stand or offer a greeting. His eyes briefly meet hers, but only for a moment before he looks back down at his computer. The woman feels a wave of unease wash over her. She forces a smile as she sits down across from him, trying to shake off the feeling that something isn't quite right. Dr. Matthews doesn't look up. His fingers tap rhythmically on the keyboard, his eyes glued to the screen. The silence stretches on, thick and uncomfortable. The woman shifts in her seat, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. "Miss Johnson, what brings you in today?" His voice is cold, almost mechanical. She takes a moment to steady her nerves before responding, her voice soft but clear. "I've been feeling lightheaded lately, and I've had some chest pain. On and off." She doesn't mention the fatigue. She doesn't want to sound like she's overreacting. Dr. Matthews doesn't acknowledge her explanation. His gaze is still fixed on the computer. "Any history of heart disease?" he asks, his voice flat. "Yes, my father had heart problems, and my mother has high blood pressure," she says, a slight tremor in her voice. She's been here before, she knows the routine, but today feels different. The doctor's fingers stop moving on the keyboard, but his eyes don't leave the screen. There's a pause, a long, uncomfortable pause. "Right." He taps something on his computer. "We'll need to run some tests." She nods, though her mind races. "Tests? For lightheadedness and chest pain?" Her stomach twists, but she keeps her voice steady. "What kind of tests?" He finally looks up at her, his eyes not meeting hers. "Blood tests, an EKG, maybe an ultrasound if needed." The woman doesn't respond right away. Something about his tone rubs her the wrong way. There's no warmth in his words, no reassurance. She tries to keep her breathing steady, but his demeanor is making her anxious. She clears her throat. "Do you think it could be serious?" she asks, her voice quieter now. Dr. Matthews doesn't answer right away. He stares at her for a beat, his lips pressed tight, as though he's debating whether or not to say something. Finally, he speaks again, but his words are dismissive. "Let's not jump to conclusions. We'll take the tests and see." The woman feels a chill in the air, though the room is warm. She doesn't know why, but the unease is creeping in deeper. The woman tries to stay calm. She nods politely, but inside, a knot tightens in her stomach. Dr. Matthews hasn't looked at her since he mentioned the tests. His eyes remain fixed on his computer screen, his fingers tapping in rhythm, almost like he's trying to avoid talking to her altogether. Her mind races, replaying every word he said. Blood tests, an EKG, maybe an ultrasound, but nothing makes sense. Chest pain, sure. Lightheadedness, it could be nothing. But her gut tells her it's more than that. She feels like a puzzle piece in a game that she doesn't understand, one that's being ignored. "Doctor?" she asks hesitantly, trying to break the silence. He doesn't respond immediately. His eyes flicker up briefly, then back down to the screen. I just wanted to ask about the tests," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you looking for exactly?" He pauses again, as though the question caught him off guard. "We'll start with the basics. Blood work, EKG, standard procedure." "But," she begins, but the words hang in the air. She doesn't want to sound demanding. She's just unsure. He hasn't explained anything clearly. "Is there a reason you're not doing a more detailed exam? Something more specific?" The doctor doesn't seem to notice her discomfort. He looks at her now, but the expression on his face is unreadable. His lips twitch slightly, like he's holding back something. I said we'll do the tests, he repeats. It's routine, no need to complicate things. She swallows hard, but something inside her tells her this isn't normal. He's still not giving her the information she needs. It's like she's just another patient to get through, another name on a list. The silence stretches out again, her hands tighten around the edge of the chair. The questions keep swirling in her head, but she doesn't feel like she's being heard. Is there anything else you need? Dr. Matthews asks, his tone flat. He's not even trying to make eye contact anymore. She hesitates. Should she push, or should she let it go? But deep down, she knows something's wrong. The woman sits there, her mind racing, as Dr. Matthews continues typing away. His indifference is suffocating. It's not just that he's not engaging with her, it's the little things that seem off. The way he speaks to her, the way his gaze drifts past her like she's not even there. Then, he looks up again, and his words cut through the silence. So, I assume you don't have a history of... He stops himself mid-sentence, his eyes flickering to her for just a moment. What's that called? High blood pressure? Diabetes? Something like that? The woman's breath catches. It wasn't the question itself that stung, but the way he phrased it. The assumption that she must have those conditions just because of the color of her skin. She blinks, trying to gather her thoughts. No, I don't have either of those, she replies, her voice steady, but her heart racing. But my family has a history of heart issues. He nods, but there's something about the way he's nodding that feels wrong. His eyes are distant again, his focus back on the computer screen. Right, well that's probably why you're here. He doesn't say it, but the implication is there, that it's just another routine checkup, a problem that fits into a box that she doesn't quite belong in. The woman feels her hands tremble in her lap. This subtle dismissiveness, this assumption, it's something she's encountered before, but never quite like this. It's in the way he asks questions without listening to her answers, in the way he talks down to her, like her concerns are secondary. She starts to speak again, but before she can, he cuts her off. Anyway, we'll run the tests and see what comes up. If it's nothing, it's nothing. No need to make a big deal out of it. He says it in a tone that feels almost dismissive, as if she's overreacting for simply seeking help. His words hit her like a slap, but she doesn't say anything. She's too stunned, too frustrated, too tired. Is this how every woman of color is treated here? As if her voice doesn't matter? She shifts in her seat, trying to hide the hurt, but his casual attitude stings in ways he'll never understand. The door creaks open, and the woman looks up, startled. Her husband, Marcus, steps into the room. He's tall, with a calm presence that instantly changes the mood in the office. He looks at her first, then at Dr. Matthews. Hey babe, Marcus says, his voice warm as he walks over to her side. He gently places a hand on her shoulder, squeezing it in reassurance. The woman smiles faintly, her anxiety easing slightly. She hadn't realized how much she was relying on his presence until now. He had always been her rock. Marcus looks at the doctor, his expression unreadable. There's something about the way he carries himself, something in his eyes that says he's not here for small talk. He's here for a reason. Dr. Matthews looks up, almost surprised to see him. Can I help you? He asks, his tone distant, almost irritated by the interruption. Marcus doesn't flinch. He glances at his wife before returning his focus to the doctor. Yeah, I'm here to see what's going on with my wife. She's been telling me about her symptoms, and it doesn't seem like you're being very thorough. The doctor's eyes narrow slightly, but he doesn't say anything. Instead, he shifts in his chair, avoiding eye contact with Marcus. Everything's fine, Dr. Matthews says, his voice clipped. We're just going over the routine tests. Marcus raises an eyebrow, unconvinced. Routine tests? Is that why you're treating her like she's just another name on a list? There's a long pause. Dr. Matthews shifts uncomfortably, his fingers tapping the desk nervously. It's clear he wasn't expecting this. The woman can see the tension building in Marcus, his protective nature kicking in. She feels a wave of relief wash over her. Her husband is here, and he's not letting this doctor dismiss her concerns. Let me get this straight, Marcus says, his voice firm now. You're telling me that my wife came in here for serious symptoms, and this is how you treat her? He looks at Dr. Matthews, a challenge in his gaze. Are you really gonna act like everything's fine? The doctor's gaze flickers briefly to the woman, but he quickly looks away. He's visibly uncomfortable now, his usual professional facade cracking under the pressure. The tension in the room escalates, and the silence feels heavy, like everyone is holding their breath. Marcus stands firm, not backing down. His gaze is steady, unflinching, as he waits for Dr. Matthews to answer. The doctor shifts in his seat, clearly uncomfortable now. His fingers tap nervously on the desk, but he doesn't look at Marcus. I'm just following protocol, Dr. Matthews says, his voice defensive though there's no conviction in his words. Routine tests are necessary for her symptoms. Marcus shakes his head slowly, clearly not buying it. Protocol? His voice rises slightly, but it's still controlled, like he's holding back something more dangerous. You've been acting like she doesn't even matter. Like her concerns don't matter. I've seen how you've been treating her, and it's unacceptable. The woman can feel the heat in her cheeks, the mix of frustration and humiliation rising in her chest. She's never felt so small, so invisible in a doctor's office. But with Marcus standing there beside her, she feels a flicker of strength. Doctor, Marcus continues, his tone now firm and demanding. What's the real reason you're treating my wife like this? You don't even want to look at her, don't even want to listen to her. Is there something I should know? His words are sharp, cutting through the thin layers of professionalism that Dr. Matthews had tried to hide behind. Dr. Matthews shifts again, his discomfort palpable now. His eyes dart to the side, avoiding Marcus's gaze. I'm just trying to do my job, he mutters, but it's clear he's not convincing either of them. No, Marcus says, stepping forward, his voice low and steady. You're trying to get rid of us. You've barely looked at her. You don't care what's wrong, and that's a problem. The doctor opens his mouth to speak but stops, his words failing him. He looks down at the desk, clearly rattled by the confrontation. I want answers, Marcus demands, and I want you to treat my wife like a person, not just another patient. The woman watches, a mix of emotions flooding through her. She's angry, relieved, and a little in awe of her husband. His voice has power. His presence commands respect. The room feels even quieter now, the tension hanging thick in the air. Marcus stands tall, his eyes never leaving Dr. Matthews, while the woman sits frozen in her seat. It's like time is slowed, the weight of what's happening pressing down on them both. Dr. Matthews shifts uncomfortably, his fingers drumming nervously on the desk. He's rattled, and it shows. The usual calm, professional demeanor is slipping away, replaced by uncertainty. Marcus doesn't move. I'm calling for a second opinion. This isn't right. You're not getting away with this. The doctor's eyes widen for a brief second, the panic clear in his expression. There's no need for that, he stammers. Everything's fine, we'll handle it. Just the usual tests. It's not a big deal. But Marcus isn't backing down. It's a big deal when my wife is treated like she doesn't matter, like her health doesn't matter. If you won't take this seriously, then I'll make sure someone else does. The woman watches as her husband reaches for his phone. She's amazed by his composure, by his ability to stand up to someone who holds so much power over her health. Her hand rests lightly on his, grounding her in this moment. The door to the office opens, and another staff member steps inside. They exchange a brief glance, but it's clear that Marcus's words are having an impact. The woman feels her chest tighten as she watches the staff member glance at Dr. Matthews, then at her. And finally, the tension in the room shifts. The doctor's mask cracks, and he looks back at the woman, finally meeting her eyes. His voice is quieter now, softer. Let's get you the right care, he says, his tone no longer cold, but hesitant. Marcus remains unwavering, his posture firm and resolute. He has made his position crystal clear. This is not something that will be ignored or conveniently forgotten. No amount of persuasion or pressure will make him back down. He refuses to let the issue be dismissed or overlooked, ensuring that it receives the attention it deserves. His determination is evident in every word and action, reinforcing that he won't allow this matter to be swept under the rug. Marcus's stance doesn't change. He's made it clear. This won't be swept under the rug.